launched as one of the first regulatory bodies in the world, and we will see what the Americans will do, we see what the Chinese will do, and this will assess whether this is a success economy-wise or not.
So basically, if there's further regulation in the space, you suspect that that will happen because of spillover effects from other regions and their approaches?
That depends whether you believe in the Brussels effect or not.
Do you?
I am paid for doing it.
I'm just going to move on from that one. Deniz, you've actually been working on information management for a very long time. You even did your PhD on the topic, which is quite impressive. I mean, you're now managing director of GMH Systems, which provides businesses with IT services and infrastructure. So it's probably quite a different perspective on that. So how would you, with what you've just heard, whether you believe in the Brussels effect or not, how would you assess this tension between competition and digital sovereignty?
So first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. I, as a representation or a representative from the industry, think that AI is something that we need in our companies to support our business processes. So you said that last year, 2023, or the GPT discussion started, or it got more present in the media. But we as industry, especially in the steel production and manufacturing industry, we already work with artificial intelligence. So it is not new for us. I think that this topic now is more present due to these technologies which are now available for all of us, for all human beings at home who is working on the internet or who has the opportunity to go to the internet. And I think that this policy is a good framework for everybody to see how AI needs to be regulated, but we also need to pay attention that these policies do not really disturb the business processes we need, because we also have other regulations as industry we have to follow. So I think government needs to pay attention that all the new policies they produce or they create, that they support the business process and they support the industry in Germany. That's why I want to say, I hope that you get this message and you take it with you, because I think it would be very nice if this would be also for us a good opportunity to use AI in every context.
So do you feel that right now you're already using AI in what you're doing, but that the regulation will stop some of that? Like, would you mind exemplifying a bit?
It's not going to stop that we use it, but it will make it much more difficult. You know, we have regulation containing the personal data, so we have to pay attention, what do we do with the personal data? So now, if we get to the next step, like AI, where do we use it, how do we use it, there are going to be much more regulations we need to pay attention to. And I think this is, like Professor Polschi had a good example, because you said that your joke with the three guests at your party, the Germans bring the regulations and they tell you how to make this party. And this is the problem I also see. And that's what I want to say, that not yet, but maybe 2026, because when the AI Act needs to be done or needs to be reflected, there is maybe then the problem we have.
So for me, I'm just going to keep drilling on that one. So if you're implementing the regulation, especially because we've heard before that there's the distinction between risk mitigation, which is something you will need to do as industry also, no matter whether there's an AI Act or not. You do have a responsibility. And then there's this threat of general purpose AI overall, which from what I'm gathering in the IT systems that you provide, you're not using at scale, or are you? Like, how do you look at that distinction between risks? How do you consider them right now? And what will change with that AI Act?
We don't use it through the whole processes. We are just starting now, but we have specific use cases we already use it. And there, in these use cases, we are just aware of what we are doing. Like, for example, the data we use for our artificial intelligence topics are within our companies. We don't host it on the outside, for example. So, but if we want to use it through the whole supply chain, we need to also do all this stuff you said before, yes.
Okay, and what's your wish if you look at the AI Act? Because you do have, you said 2026, that's when it applies to you. That's 3 years. Is that enough time to prepare for that? Or what are your worries as an industry representatives around that?
We need to be aware of that, and we need the management commitment to this topic, because I think that we have now the problem also in our industry that it's just cold and old economy. So, for example, we in the steel production, we have old factories, we have old technologies, and if we want to use AI, we need to provide the conditions to use it. And I think that it is a chance for us, or also we need to think about the skill shortage, because we need employees for our business processes, and if we don't get them, we need to find options how we can fulfill that. And I think AI is able to support us, to make us more efficient, and just to enable every new technology or new process we want to live.
Thank you, and that actually triggered something that I wanted to ask Wolfgang, because we've talked about skills and particularly the role of AI when we were standing there prepping this panel. And Wolfgang is the General Manager of Corporate External and Legal Affairs and a member of the executive leadership team at Microsoft, but you've also held positions at Apple, Hewlett-Packard, and Bitkom, among others, so you have quite the broad industry perspective on all of those developments. So if you look at those tensions, competition, but also safety, and what does it mean for the future of our work environment, like it's a very broad question, but you're a much bigger player than some of the others. So how do you look at that?
Yeah, that is a big question. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being here at Microsoft. We just came out with our 2024 Work Trend Index. That's an annual study we do with LinkedIn on trends in the workplace. And obviously, AI in the workplace is the topic that was top of mind for this report that came out last week. What I found staggering is the amount of people now in the world that say AI is just such an important part of my professional life. Worldwide, 75% say, I do need AI tools for my work. Europe, 63%, it's a little less. Germany, 69%. We asked 31,000 people, and we also used the signals from our tools that many people use in the world. So we believe we have quite a good sense of how people are craving for AI in the workplace. There is an interesting figure, and that's the final figure I'm giving you from this Work Trend Index, where 60% of all the time that is spent on our tools really is related to meetings, email, chat. So the regular ongoing stuff that we do every day in our offices as knowledge workers, at least. And that is something that in the last Work Trend Index last year we called digital debt. It means that we are spending so much time on things that are not creative, that are not really moving the company or organization forward necessarily, that need to be done, but that don't really add as much value as things that you do in Word, things you do in your presentation, things you do on any other kind of technology. That was just 40% of the cake. So the point here is that people are craving for tools that help them get rid of the routine work. People are really looking to use technology to be more creative, to add more value, and to be able to interact with their coworkers better and more. And that's something I think that can ground us in looking at regulation. That is what we really need from regulation. It is meant to free up space for people to use technology. And will it do that? AI is a fundamental technology. It's something that only comes across on a rare basis. And we need to be mindful of all the dangers. We need to be mindful of all the risks. And I'm sure you've been talking about and listening to presentations on many of the risks and many of the perils and threats of AI technology, for sure. But we need to be clear-eyed. We need to have a view of the advantages, of the benefits, of the potential. And to unlock that potential, we need a framework like the AI Act. And I'm sparing comments on the AI Act for the moment. You need a framework to cater for the risk. You need a regulation that helps you make sure that you are using AI in an ethical and in a responsible manner. But we need to be able to use AI. AI needs to come to every person, to every worker, to every company and organization, and it does not. And I think this is really the core of what we should discuss today.
I'm going to be slightly provocative, because in some of the things that you just said, with like people want to be more creative and not do so many routine tasks, agree. And I wonder, is that sort of a privileged conversation, because a lot of people are also saying, well, we just need to work less in general. And if we outsource and automate a lot of our processes, doesn't that just mean that employers are going to ask more of other things from them? So how do you think about balancing that? Because if that just means that people are going to do more of other tasks, that's also challenging.
You're asking me? Yeah, that's a fascinating discussion, and we need a separate panel for that. There was a huge discussion over, are Germans working too much? Are they working too little? Do we need more working hours, less working hours? People need to retire earlier or later? That is something where there is so much data that at the end of reading all that, you think, well, you're at the very beginning of the discussion, because it's not a clear answer. It is something that is embedded in our society that requests all of us to work more intensively. And because we have to work more intensively, one way or another, be it more time, or be it more energy, be it more mindfulness, or be it more ingenuity, we need to have tools in order to be able to do that, because demographic change is a reality, because cost and availability of skills is a reality. And that, again, is why everyone should try out AI, should have AI on their desk, on their smartphones. We should be just able to use it every minute, every second, whenever we want to use it, because only that is going to give us the maturity and the routine in dealing with these technology to really put them to life and put them to a good use for exactly those purposes that you mentioned.
And I'm going to keep drilling you. So one of the questions that I have when I look at that is that the EU is a very privileged and all of those values and mindfulness, and we need time and all of those things. We're discussing all of that. But what about the regions outside the European Union that are often used as, let's be honest, guinea pigs for new tools and trying out certain, whether that's data protection that's not respected, or whether that's trying out new technological developments, etc. So how are we thinking about that? Because the impact isn't bound by where the EU market regulates. So how do you consider the borders beyond the European Union in your work?
So what I've seen in many examples of AI put to work in industry, in services industries, in people's individual lives, is that those places that have less of a industrial high-end system sometimes find it easier to just start doing it, using it, and playing around with things. It is a technology that is very cheap to have. If you want to use GPT-4, just go to Bing Chat, it's free. If you want to use it on your personal desktop, it's free, or maybe it's $20. In many places of the world that are less affordable than Germany or Europe is, it is a technology that can actually help people to skill themselves. I think all of us are meeting people that learn languages without ever having been in a place that speaks those languages. They just learn it using YouTube, and now they're using it through Copilot or other AI applications. So I actually think it is helping societies and people individually to leapfrog some of the advantages that technology diffusion in the world has created.
Okay, you look like you wanted to jump in. Are you okay, or do you want to comment on that?
Just maybe a short comment, because there is geopolitical tensions in the title of the discussion. And I would advise us, as long as there are countries, adversary actors, as we call them in international politics, as long as there are countries and adversary actors that work way more than 40 hours, like 60 and 70 hours a week, and have the same tools, we should refrain from working less. Sorry to kill the mood.
You're really the mood raiser in this conversation. Thank you.
I'm a government official.
True, that's your job. So I'm going to move over to Meta, because the industry players bring the joy. So Semjon, you've been with Meta for a very long time, since 2016, and we reflected earlier, we've actually met over 10 years ago already in various roles in the tech industry. So we've both been in this field for a long time. You're now currently serving as public policy director for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. But you also, I know, have a very deep personal interest in transatlantic relations and looking beyond just what's happening in the EU. So what dynamics do you see unfold when it comes to regulation and the tensions we've been discussing? Like, I'm sure there's some international keywords and frameworks you want to drop.
Yeah, sure. Let me maybe start with explaining a bit what Meta does with regard to AI, because I think it's publicly less known in comparison to other companies and explains a lot of my views on AI, of course. So Meta has been engaging in doing fundamental research on AI for more than 10 years. Our AI research center is actually based in Europe. It's in Paris and led by the French Yann Lecan, one of the pioneers in the realm of AI. And we have been releasing more than 1,000 models over the past 10 years, all of them open sourced. Foundation models, basically enabling others to use our technology like Llama 2 or the latest version which was released, which is Llama 3. There are a few very interesting examples, I would say. We talked about languages, for example, and language barriers. Based on Llama 3, there was a tool developed for underserved languages like Urdu. Not many people are speaking these languages and have difficulties to access information in the internet. So others built an AI tool based on Llama 3 to build this bridge to this underserved language, and there are many more examples in this regard. So we talk a lot about, of course, the economic impact, the added value for efficiency wins within companies, but the social aspect, I think, is equally important in this regard. Coming to your question, I mean, it's very interesting how AI unfolds internationally, and of course it was very much discussed at the World Economic Forum in Davos earlier this year. I was participating at the Munich Security Conference as well, where it was a big topic, rather related to security and foreign politics, of course. And looking at AI from a geoeconomic or geostrategic point of view, I would say there are 3 or 4 big pillars. First, the United States are, of course, leading in the development of AI. 74% of the investments, the private investments, globally are coming from the United States and companies like ours. We're just investing this year 38 billion in AI, which is, I think, more than the entire European Union is investing. So this is really massive, and of course it creates a gap towards the European Union. The private investments into AI within the European Union dropped from 13% to 9% just last year. I find this momentum quite interesting because it was at the same time when we discussed the AI Act. And then there are, of course, players like China and authoritarian regimes around the globe who are trying to catch up and who are actually catching up and who are not sharing our values in Europe and not necessarily the transatlantic values. So coming to the international frameworks you asked for, from my point of view, the G7 Hiroshima process was really important in this regard. And my understanding is that Germany, Japan, the United States played a key role in developing these principles, at least for the G7 countries, but they, of course, serve as a cornerstone for further development on the international stage. The United States issued an executive order. There was a White House declaration on AI. We and many other companies participated in. And of course, the OECD ever since has been quite active. Mark Alexander Breit, I think, is much familiar with the work of the OECD, but equally important. And I think what is important now, looking at these different frameworks we have the EU AI Act in Europe, we have the G7 principles, we have the White House executive order in the United States, is to develop a coherent framework, at least a transatlantic framework, but ideally, of course, with India and other democratic nation states around the globe to counter visions by authoritarian regimes like China, for example, who have a totally different idea and values related to artificial intelligence. So this should be really, from my point of view, the next step.
Thank you very much for sharing. As you were sharing the numbers of investments and like the influence on all those frameworks that are happening, I can't help but like notice and also sort of ask further, following all those frameworks, all those discussions, and obviously investments at that scale, that's only something that big players can do. But what does that do to small and medium-sized companies that make up large parts of the industry, for example, in Europe? So how do you engage with these frameworks and make sure that they don't just work for the big ones, but for everyone?
Well, I'm representing a big player, but nevertheless, I mean, there are two things I think which are important. First, it's investments. And I think the problem in Europe is the investments and by private players is a huge problem, especially in Germany. That has been for the last 10 years and maybe even longer. So curbing these private investments into new technologies is key. And I mean, we're not the only big player. I mean, there are very big German corporations as well who could and are partly investing in such technologies. And then looking at the European landscape, I think the problem is that these investments, again, are too fragmented. I mean, each and every European country is basically boosting and promoting their own AI ecosystem. And looking at Germany, it is even worse. I mean, we are having many federal states who are doubling down with their own AI programs in addition. So the investment side is a huge problem. Coming to the regulatory side we just discussed is also a problem. And don't get me wrong, I think, for example, the AI Act is not hampering innovation. But if I look at the European Union and the regulatory framework and the laws which were passed over the past 10 years, it's highly complex. The laws are partly overlapping. I mean, take our company. We have, in theory, on the paper, we would have 35 regulators just in Germany, which is insane. I'm sorry to be that frank, but it is too much. And each and every single law had good intents, looking, for example, at the General Data Protection Regulation. Don't get me wrong, the regulation itself is fine. But we have 16 German states, and we have 18 data protection authorities. Enforcing these rules in a very different manner, just in Germany. And now look at Europe. I mean, that makes it even more complicated. And the GDPR is a regulation. Same for the AI Act and many other laws. And the problem is that despite the fact that the European Union tried to establish harmonized frameworks in a harmonized digital single market, we have fragmented enforcement. And this is, I think, the major challenge why a German startup or SMB can't easily scale from Berlin to Portugal or any other European country. And scale and size matters, of course, in the digital world, as we know for years. So this is something I think the European Union has the chance to fix with the next mandate of the European Commission. I mean, we're just ahead of the European Parliament elections, but it is really time sensitive and an urgent matter.
For sure is, and as you mentioned fragmentation, you earlier said that the next step in regulation would be to not just look at the EU, but at transatlantic relationships, frameworks that go beyond. If we can't enforce it in the EU where we have harmonized law, how would you approach that? Like then we have the same enforcement issue, no?
You mean in the transatlantic? Oh, of course, I mean, to a certain degree, I guess. I mean, I think the United States and Europe are allies. You said that I'm a transatlanticist, and I deeply believe in the shared values. But at the end of the day, we will never have the same regulation in the United States and Europe. But making it as close as possible and agreeing at least on the fundamental issues and values in particular, I think that's manageable. And I think Europe will be very busy, first of all, to fix the European digital single market. I mean, this is already a huge task, I would say.
And everyone's looking to my left. So I'm going to turn to Marco again, because particularly when it's the fragmentation of the framework, you've worked on a lot of those policy issues. What's your take on that, and what's the solution for improving it?
If I take the... I'm speaking for the German Ministry of Economic Affairs. And if I take the picture into account that we, the Germans, come to a party and we tell everybody how to have that party, we are one of 16 ministries in this government, and I can reassure you that we in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, we would be the ones that would be asking, okay, yeah, but shouldn't we bring something to drink too? And that's the answer, but I see that I will not, that will not be enough.
Experiences with this ministry.
Yeah, with this ministry?
Not with the current minister, but with the predecessor. It was horrible.
Okay, so there's some pushback from the audience. You're not done.
Yeah, but you need to name the occasion, and then I might be able to answer.
We can do that.
No, I think it's of interest. Yes.
Do we have microphones that we can bring to the audience, since this discussion is already unfolding and I do want to have some control?
And until then I can say yes, the fragmentation of the governmental bodies is a huge problem, because it's not just in Germany, it's that some companies like to go to Ireland, for example, because they just don't enforce rules. Yes, that is a problem too. Yes.
We had a nice what do you say episode with the Ministry of Economic Affairs, which wasn't climate change before, when you had the Digital Lighthouses Initiative. Digitale Leuchttürme.
Yeah.
The artificial intelligence lighthouses of Minister Altmaier.
Okay. Yeah.
And the problem that I mentioned as an example in my presentation with the mobile payment and all that stuff, there is a keynote that I had for Minister Barley when she was still Minister of Justice in Germany. And we made a proposition to attack that problem. And it was with a couple of unknown German companies such as Deutscher Sparkassen- und Giroverband on the board level, SAP, one level below the board, Institut der deutschen Wirtschaft, and a couple of others. And funny enough, they haven't even read it in the ministry, I bet. I can show you the answer letter.
Okay, I'm still a bit confused. Nevertheless,
did you hear my talk before, or
no? I had to. Work.
Then it makes no sense. I thought you heard it before.
I understand where you're coming from. So the thing is twofold. First of all, it depends whether you see governmental action should be pushing for innovation or whether it should just guideline innovation, and this is a very different approach. And for example, nowadays, if we're talking about AI, we're talking about huge companies that have the means and the capital to work on AI. And I remember being in the midst in 2018 when there was a narrative going around. It was even 2016, and we're talking about an Airbus for AI in Europe and how to do that. And there was a small group of people that said, look, AI is 2 steps too far. We need to start with cloud infrastructure. And then there was an endeavor, and I do not want to assess that endeavor and where it stands nowadays and whether it fulfilled its promises, but Gaia X has been the thought derived into action back then. And nowadays, 5 years later, everything that happened says that we have been perfectly right, because it is the huge cloud infrastructure players that have the means and the capital to work on AI. And it's perfectly fine that that Meta does that kind of leveling the playing field via open source AI, because they actually level the playing field for small and medium enterprises, for other players that do not have the capital and the access to NVIDIA chips. But the thing is, they level the playing field on the international level too. Because if you take geopolitical tensions into account, and then you say, look, there is only two points of regulation that a government can address when it comes to AI. A is the access to hardware, which the US government does by strongly enforcing the export of NVIDIA chips right now. And the second thing is if you bring a software into the market, which the European Union does with the AI Act, and the moment you open source all this, you take away both regulatory points. Because if you open source the model, then you do not need to invest that much capital and that much time and not into the hardware as said by NVIDIA. And if you open source the usage via easy access for third world countries, and I cannot count them third world countries, for the global south, then you actually give the access to our adversary actors too, which means you're leveling the playing field on the international scale too. And this is what I meant with, it is 2 schools of thought, but you should harness that or not.
And I know that Wolfgang wants to jump in.
I just wanted to say a word of protection here for the federal government, not in the sense of individual people, but the democratic system we have. Democracy is the political practice of liberalism, and I totally understand your frustration, and I've been there many times when, you know, the papers, the ideas, the concepts you develop will not necessarily be put into practice. I think what we observe is a situation where a multitude of pressure factors from external and internal sources weigh upon governments in all democratic systems across Europe and, in fact, in the world. And what they try to do is to find a way to deal with all those influences, with all those pressures, with all those different ideas and concepts. And in fact, you can see it in the AI Act. When I started working on the AI Act, I realized that this whole thing was pretty much ready and done when ChatGPT only emerged. And that's what Marco just mentioned when he said, you know, the second school of thought. And that was when the entire political decision-making system, that time around in the EU and the European Parliament and the EU institutions, had to sort of like go back to the drawing board and do it all over again. And they tried to. And that is, I think, the reason why we have this notion of general purpose AI and then general purpose AI with systemic risk. So trying to keep alive the fundamental notion of a risk-based approach, which I think everybody here on panel is agreeing to, with the notion of, oh, there is something happening that no policymaker in the world had foreseen. It came so quickly, and it was fundamentally changing the view of AI. It was all of a sudden creating a hype and making it feelable in a way that was not there before. And so you can sense the compromising, you can sense the impromptu approach and struggling with coming to terms with this technology and legislation. Given the fact that that's the case and that we now have something that has been agreed, I would still say there's a lot of reasons for criticism, reasons to be frustrated, but fundamentally we should, you know, work against the basis that we do have a piece of legislation that will help to regulate AI in a thoughtful and responsible manner, and hopefully, and I have a couple of ideas too, which, you know, we should pay attention to, but I think leveling us where this is what was possible under the amount of pressure and time is something that is worthwhile stating.
Thank you for repeating that. And that sort of also transitions us to that whole body of, okay, so we have an AI Act. It has its pluses and its minuses. But in general, what do these technological developments and the trends that we're seeing mean for policymaking in general? Because you just mentioned that this is a hype, but there have been other technological hypes before, right? It's not the first time that we go through a wave where it feels like the policy is behind the development. So stuff is already happening before you regulate. To a certain extent, that's okay, because you regulate what you know. But is there something in the way we're creating legislations and policies that needs to change, where we need to be more innovative? Okay, and you're jumping in.
Hindsight is 2020. But if I would, not the governmental view, but my personal view would have been to leave the AI Act as it was in the beginning of 2023, and then try to assess the impact that general purpose AI, generative AI has on our value systems, on our value chains, and value systems and democracy and all the other things that are at risk in 2 years' time. But this didn't work, obviously, for two reasons. First of all, there's the electoral calendar in Brussels, which means that in 2025, everything needs to be everything needs to be ready because there is elections in May, and Brussels can only come to work at the end of 2024, which means that you're losing a whole year. And the second thing is that the public mood, is what I said, was strongly for regulating it now and not later. So it would have been better to make it in 2 steps, but this is not how this is not how the regulatory process in Brussels works.
But if we maybe bring it back to Wolfgang, that's not how it works right now, but what would be suggestions that you may have for how can we be more innovative and maybe faster in the policy making and not just be determined by elections and new commissions setting up?
Yeah, so I think AI is a fundamental technology, Grundlagentechnologie, in the sense that there is only, and innovation theory differs here on the number, but there is maybe 20 or 25, whatever, fundamental technologies in the history of mankind, and this is going to be one. So it's going to affect pretty much everything, from aerospace and aviation, to energy, to automobiles, to knowledge working and healthcare. It's going to affect everything. And it's going to create a technology stack. That's the way we like to look at it. It's going to start with energy, reliable electricity, and broadband. And you will need data centers, GPUs. You will need data. You'll need foundation models, large language models, tooling on top of it, applications, and then people work and deploy AI. So it's a whole ecosystem that will be in place and that will leave room for many players in all corners of the world and in all levels of organizations and companies. And in order to cater for these opportunities that are there, I think there has been many voices, rightly so, that ask for a certain level of openness and reliability in implementing this important set of regulation. We offer events here in the Microsoft Atrium on a regular basis. We call AI Can Do, KI Kann, and we have representatives of various companies, industry companies. We just said healthcare here. We'll have the Mittelstand environment here. And they talk about their examples of using AI. And it's amazing to see, and we've just had Hannover Messe, as you know, and it's amazing to see how many ideas, how many use cases, how many already workable solutions there are on AI. So I'm confident that this will come to play, and we just need to think of the technology stack. So addressing obligations from the AI Act to the right level in the technology stack, not asking wrong people and wrong organizations to do things that they should not do. And then on Semjon's point, and my final point, just to stress the importance of things like the Hiroshima process for the G7 and also international standardization. The European Union has the AI Act, and they have come in first, if you will, with a piece of regulation. But that needs to be compatible with international legislation and standardization. I think that really is a prerequisite for European AI companies to be successful.
Thank you. And maybe, Deniz, to bring that back to you, because we've heard a lot about all of those processes and the frameworks happening and how it needs to be applied. And you mentioned earlier how, yes, you're using AI in a lot of your services, and it is challenging to comply with all of these. So how are you thinking about all of the things we've touched upon, and how will that affect your work going forward? And what does it mean for policy making, right?
I think that AI is going to be a very relevant part of our future technologies. You said the technology stack we need to provide, or which AI is going to provide. I think that it is going to affect the whole jobs we have in industry, in our industry, but also in other sectors. In the same time, I would like to say that I just don't get really, or I didn't heard it before now, because I think we also need to translate, for example, the AI Act to our employees, because most of them are scared using AI. Not just scared, they're like, okay, I'm going to lose my job. That's what we also heard before. But I think that we need to show that it is also an opportunity for us to be competitive in the world. Because what we also heard today is that we're not that one of the good nations anymore, what is like before 20 years ago, when the industrialization just pushed Germany very, very high. But now we're just one of a million countries providing technologies or providing products in the economy. So I think AI is very important, and in the same time, I think that also the policies are important. I said before, yes, policies are regulations making maybe some processes more complicated, but in the same time, I think it's also necessary to give the framework so the employees know how they handle the technology stack we introduce in our companies, for example.
And do you have the resources to translate that for your employees, or are there other institutions or organizations that you would look for help in order to make that happen? Because that sounds like a long process of explaining and bringing people along.
I think it should be also provided by the company itself, because if you get, if it's possible, you should get help. But I think we don't have the time to get in touch with other organizations to provide support, because I think employees trust their own managers. And so it is a journey, both have to go. The management commitment must be there, but also the employees have to be open to these technologies. And I think it's a journey they need to get together on this trip.
And do you have people who are like charged in your organization with following policy trends, legislations, and do they engage with other companies on that issue?
We are working on that by now, because we know it's getting more and more important, and we want to establish a digital mindset to all our employees, because I think it is necessary to be open to the new technologies.
as you're an IT service provider, I would feel like you're probably at the leading edge of that, but you're saying that that's still something because so much is changing that it's challenging.
Yes, and we have to work on that, especially in our sector, which is, we heard demographic change. Yes, the average age of our employees is maybe higher than, I don't want to say that, but maybe it's not that younger generation that is very attractive to our sector. That's also a problem. So if we want to be attractive for young employees, we also need to be more digital, and we have to provide this digital mindset.
Yeah, totally. And Semjon, bringing you back in, because we've talked about policy making and being innovation friendly, but also how can policy making be more innovative? Do you have ideas and concepts on that? You've already said that you want broader frameworks, but how do we keep pace in policy making?
It's a good question. 6 years ago, I might have said that politics is too slow. Meanwhile, I think the AI Act is the perfect example. I would rather think maybe it's exactly right, because some things, especially emerging technologies, just take time. And when I just have a look at the discussion process in my own company on all these frameworks, it's highly complex because there are so many angles to the topic. So I really don't envy policymakers in keeping up the pace, the expertise with these complex topics. And I mean, it's a great value that we are living in democracies and under the rule of law. So meanwhile, I think maybe we do not need to change too much about the pace, maybe a bit rather about the culture, because still in Europe, the tendency is, of course, to only look at the risks. As said, the AI Act, I think, is striking a good balance. But overall, I think we are way too worried about future risks which might arise in 10 years. Not saying that we shouldn't look at this, but we really need to stress a bit more the potentials and the chances. And you might have seen that I worked for StudiVZ 12 years ago. I think we have a momentum here to turn Europe around with regard to emerging technologies and create an innovative European tech company, as we are now starting to endeavor the age of AI. And embracing this chance, I just can highlight this, would be really fantastic. And I think that should be also a bit of the air policymakers are breathing in Parliament and in the federal government, rather seeing also the chances.
Thank you. One of the last rounds I want to do with all the panelists before, if you have questions, already think about formulating them and signaling to the people with the microphones that you want them. But we just said that it's nice that we still live in a democracy and we shouldn't think too far ahead of the risks, but 2024 is a super election year. We have more than half of the world's population going to the ballots. That's enormous, and we haven't seen that many democracies voting in 1 year ever, and it's going to be many years before that happens again. And we're also seeing more and more incidences in the elections that have already taken place where deepfakes, but also sheepfakes, be it voice, be it video, be it just text messages, are used to campaign and spread disinformation. Also, AI technology that generates content. And we've also seen even some political campaigns where parties that are part of the elections use AI tools to generate campaign content that can then be posted on social platforms outside of electoral oversight, which is obviously a risk to our public discourse. Right? It's very different from what we've discussed before, but here's a risk that's already there, and that's happening right now. So how do you feel about that? And I'm just gonna, do you want to start? Okay, so you go ahead.
Yeah, it's also for us, of course, a highly important topic right now, and we had already some democratic elections taking place. I think India is just taking place more or less right now. So I'm trying to frame this a bit. AI, as it's discussed in the public with regard to election, is often framed as a major threat and as a topic on its own. But if we have a look on how especially foreign actors like Russia, China, Iran, and others are trying to manipulate and influence democratic elections in the West, I would rather describe AI as a tool in this regard. So what we have seen over the past 200 elections we accompanied as Meta are changing strategies, but this is, I give you just a few examples, I could talk about this for hours, is hack and leak campaigns. So trying to gather sensitive information from policymakers in order to use this against policymakers afterwards. We have seen this just in Germany right now with the attack on the SPD headquarters, but many other instances. I would even say the incident at the German Air Force and the hacking or social engineering which took place is another example. So this is a very old tactic from Cold War times, still actual. So AI is altering this a little bit. So it could be, of course, that these actors are using captured information and use AI to alter the information, to spread disinformation and spread confusion about the authenticity of stolen information. That could be one example. Or they could boost fake account networks in the internet or in social media. But what we have observed so far is positive and negative at the same time. So far, unfortunately or fortunately, the old tactics prevail because they are cheaper. It is easy just to take a picture of a policymaker from Google Pictures and put a wrong quote on this picture and then try to share it. Or it's easier to create a fake website of Bild Zeitung, which just happened in October, and write something wrong about Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, which also just happened in October. So you don't need AI for these things. And as long as it's cheaper and similarly efficient, AI will not be used as heavily as it could be by these actors. One caveat, of course, it's rather a question of time until this will change, whether it will be for the European Parliament elections or for the US elections or maybe just next year, we will see. So I don't want to undervalue the threat this could possess for us. But right now, what we observe is rather willing classic tactics, very cheap methods by foreign actors like Russia. Just to frame a little bit on the role of AI when it comes to election meddling. But of course, we can't wait. We have to be active. And I mean, we, Microsoft and many others are investing heavily in these technologies, for example, in watermarking AI content on our platforms. At the Munich Security Conference, we just agreed on the Munich Tech Accord, which basically sets forth a very close collaboration between I think over 25 tech companies globally to exchange information, to work on sharing of watermarking of AI content and so on. So this is of course very important work. And just one last remark, because we often think in the context of elections that AI is the threat. For us, it is also actually the shield. So we say it is the sword, but it can be also the shield. If you think about like our platforms, we have over 3.5 billion users on our platform. It's massive. So we need AI technologies and machine learning to detect these suspicious activities by foreign actors. So AI is not just a threat, it is really also for, especially social media actors, a shield to protect our platforms and our users against foreign interference.
Thank you, and I see that you already have your microphone ready. I mean, Microsoft obviously also owns, we're going to go over in a moment, okay, also owns LinkedIn, and LinkedIn for a long time has been sort of sheltered from this, but the platform's also changing fast ever since X's, say, decline, downfall. There's more happening there, and I can say that on my timeline, I also see more bots interaction, more negative comments, etc. So how are you dealing with that also with some of it being automated or AI-generated content?
Yeah, I wanted to say I agree with everything that Semjon just said, and we have in fact agreed on this Munich Tech Accord to come forward with a couple of proposals, technology solutions to deal with it. I would still say we need to take this very serious, just because from our experience in working with political candidates across Europe, and we just now this week have a team of people from Redmond here, from a Democracy Forward team who are coming to Berlin as well and many other places to offer trainings for political candidates. How do I discern if something is an AI deepfake in an election? How do I deal with it? Should I ignore it? Sometimes it's a good reason to ignore it. Many times it's not, and what can I do about it? We have just created and put online a website where political candidates can call on and show us their material, and we can help them to find out whether this is an AI deepfake, where it is coming from, and what you can do about it. So political candidates, agreed, typically have issues with old-style digital technology in elections. But the detrimental effect, the sheer panic factor of perfectly done AI deepfakes is just too important to ignore. And that is why we have invested heavily in the same things like content watermarking and content provenance. But we're trying to go to the front of this, to the end of the cycle, if you will, offer concrete solutions to policymakers. Like when the team is going to be here in Berlin, we will have training workshops with all the political parties, some of the ministries. I'm not sure if the Ministry of Economic Affairs is on, but we'll find out. And then that is something that I believe is necessary, where we, by the way, partner with LinkedIn, which, as you say, rightly so, with the rather weakness of some other platforms, there has been more going on also in the political sense on LinkedIn, so we're taking this very seriously.
Thank you. Do you want to join in, since the ball was just thrown to you?
Yeah, maybe three things. The first, Semjon started it, and it illuminated very well how AI is a tool and a weapon at the same time. And yes, there's the sword and the shield, but we do agree that, and this is what Wolfgang said, that the sword is quicker than the shield most of the time. And if I want to start a fake news campaign against a certain candidate, and I take 2 months' time, then I'll be way quicker than the defendant. And so there is still a threat, and this is the thing you mentioned too. And two things changed, and because the deepfake is as old as the picture, and Joseph Stalin was on a lot of pictures with 12 people, and in the end it was only him. But the thing is that now we have a global community that shares these pictures, which means all of a sudden it is of interest for me who's on this picture. Before it didn't matter. And the second thing is that the narratives are, these people, they pay other people that the narratives are repeated. So it is actually, it is a campaign. It's just not doing something and then spit it out like a meme or something. It is a campaign. And these people are way better at doing these campaigns than we are at defending these campaigns. So we will see, because this is a very important electoral year, and yes, the US elections is important, but I am happy if the Eastern German elections are over without a major incident. This would be great. But now the third part, and this is, I'm very happy to hear what both of you said, because it is in responsibility of the platforms. It is in the responsibility of platforms, and I'm happy to see that TikTok even started to contribute to the larger ideas of self-government and watermarking here. Because without the platforms that the adversary actors and adversary countries use, nothing. All of this is of no use, because they just won't use watermarkings. They just don't use the technology, and they just elude with their narratives any means of controlling them. So I'm happy to hear that the platforms take this very serious now.
Indeed. You're looking at me like, oh my God, what am I going to say? But please jump in.
I just want to add something, because I don't think that is not, it's not just only the responsibility of the platforms. I think it's also the responsibility of, for example, parents to educate the children, and also of media to say or to tell everybody that there are deepfake possibilities, because especially myself as a former researcher, I'm a fan of references. If I get information, I want to know where does this information come from. And I think we need to make all the people aware that there are possible deepfakes in the internet, and to show that, especially in this kind of situations like elections, they have to be careful what kind of information they consume. So just as an addition to what has been said before.
Thank you. And I'm looking at the round. I know there are 2 questions that you have, but are there, I see one hand already. 2, okay. We do have questions. You want to start with yours and go around?
I start with mine. It's a member of ours, Leonhard Birnbaum, the CEO of E.ON. He wanted to be here, but he couldn't due to scheduling issues. So his question is to the panel: is the AI Act, in your eyes, something that makes us more competitive than other regions? And can we win innovation via regulation? And the second question is, what will Europe do if other regions don't follow us in regulating?
I think that's two questions, so there's two answers. One is yes and one is no. I think no is the answer to, is the AI going to make us more competitive as the AI Act? I would wonder that is not the case, just because it's a piece of regulation, and regulation typically doesn't cater for innovation. It creates a level playing field, it creates a regulatory framework, and in this indirect sense, I would say yes, it is creating something that Europeans seem to need in order to be able to address this technology and to use it. What's more important, and that is the second question of Deniz asked, is that what we observe is with many of our customers, they see the value and the benefit of AI, and then they start using it. And they construct this as being an IT project. And so they put AI into the IT project of their company, and then they get 100 co-pilots or whatever other AI assistant, and they start playing around with it. Sometimes very big companies have only a very limited number of AI licenses, and that is the wrong approach, because AI as a fundamental technology is not something you can put into your IT department. You need to attack it front and center. You need to bring it to all your employees. Back to the numbers that I mentioned in the beginning, 75% globally of employees and knowledge workers believe they need to have this in order to get rid of this digital stress and digital debt. So the real answer is not how is regulation shaped. The real answer is people being willing, being able, and being empowered to use AI on a daily basis, to try it out. You all know that prompting is something that takes time. You need to play around with it for a while. And then all of a sudden you realize all the possibilities, all the stuff that it does for you, and really takes away this churn and this time that you used to have to spend on translating and searching and summarizing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really the benefit and the beauty of just bringing as much AI technology to people as fast as we can. So that would be really my answer.
Okay, in short, does it make us more competitive now, or?
As Europe? I don't want to dominate this here, but I think because Europe is a continent, a group of societies that has liberal democracies, which sometimes are considered to be too slow, and maybe for a good reason, but we seem to have a legal system, rule of law was mentioned. We seem to have societal tradition and cultural heritage that requires us to go this way. We just can't emulate other societies one-to-one. We have to, for good or bad, follow traditions, follow approaches, follow or mindsets to a certain degree. And I see this in the AI Act. I'm not saying it's a perfect piece of legislation. I'm just happy it's there and we can stop, advocating, and we can start thinking about implementing it.
And what if just Europe will regulate and the US and China will not? What do we do then?
That's what I said. That's not enough. The most important thing is for Europe to innovate, is to use it, to try it out, to build own technologies. I was talking about the tech stack. So it's not all about the models that are provided by a limited number of companies. It's about applications, it's about data, and all the various elements of the stack that are provided by, in fact, millions of companies in the world, hundreds of thousands in Europe.
It's a very German Jein.
That's very suitable.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Martin Hallen. I work with Cathleen at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. The question that I wanted to ask, actually, I will start with a short remark and then go to a short other place. One observation, I think, and we're at the United Europe event here, is the whole question also, what do we do within Europe so that we actually join forces a bit better? I mean, one thing that stuck in my mind reading the news yesterday was the foreign direct investment of Microsoft, I think, in France. On the data centers, also in the eastern area. And the big question, why France? Why not Germany, for example? So there's this whole kind of conundrum there also of where the platforms are going. But I brush this aside. The question that I wanted to ask you is, now looking at the new commission coming in rather sooner than later, what would be, in your perspective also, the bold vision that you would hope would be formulated of what we now actually do about all of this. Because everything you described as, you know, the European way, liberal democracies, and it's our history, etc., that might be all correct. But it doesn't want to make me throw in my head into the ring and say, I'm going to join that. That's great, and I think we're going to compete with the others on exactly these values. So I'm wondering, depending, of course, on the stakeholder positions here, but also, I guess, us all feeling European, what would be this bold vision that we would hope to hear? And does the tech stack, does digital public infrastructure play a role? What are the actual inspiring next steps that we all actively can now pursue that make sense of this heterogeneity that surrounds us? That, when we look at AI training, we haven't mentioned data at all, can actually be a superpower in many ways. But you mentioned Gaia X for a moment there in the right way. But I'm wondering, and that's maybe, you know, the quick impulse I wanted to throw into the group. Thanks.
If I may, I'm usually all up for big thoughts and big visions. I like visions too, and larger ideas and thinking strategically. But I do not really know whether this means understanding AI correctly, because what Wolfgang said is of utmost importance. This is a game changer technology, and AI will be like electricity is like people. Like you can compare AI in a lot of different fields with a lot of different technologies, with nuclear energy and with electricity. But in the end, AI is infrastructure, and to say that we need this large idea, the large vision that we should take as an endeavor and all go that way, would mean that you lose the small things that you need to decide out of view. And to better grasp it, I think that we should work on just lowering the threshold for small and medium enterprises to just embrace the technology. That would be a great assessment. If that would work, would be great. This is not a large idea, it's not a large vision, but it would be, I think it's the most important part. For example, in Germany, we have so many small and medium enterprises that still need to be being brought into the data economy, that I think talking about the larger ideas would mean that you focus less on the infrastructure part of AI and data.
Thank you. And Semjon, you also wanted to come in.
Yeah, maybe two high-level comments. The first one, maybe for the government side or European Commission side. I was attending a couple of weeks ago intergovernmental consultation between the US and the German government on AI, biotech, and chips. Was about emerging technologies. And I must say I was really fascinated how strategic the Americans were about their goals. Very clear, controversial, I must say, but very clear. And it was absolutely clear what measures should follow based on the assessments and everything. Not saying that we have not enough strategies in Europe, but I think like a very comprehensive and very clear vision of where we want to go with artificial intelligence and emerging technologies more broadly would be really helpful for the European Union, because then we would have a clear compass where to go. I mean, partly that exists already, but really just partly, and I don't think it's in the same way done as the United States are doing it. And maybe from a private sector point of view, I agree with what also Markus said, and I mean, we have a very positive example here from a German company with Deniz, who are really applying these technologies, and I think that is also maybe not just politics, it's also the economy which needs to embrace this much more clearly, and I'm sometimes surprised that it needs the education by policymakers who are driving sometimes innovation and German companies or European companies to adapt these technologies. I think that's also clearly something where incentives needs to put in place, or a bit of pressure to really understand these technologies, as Marco just said, as an infrastructure, as something really fundamental.
Marco can barely sit in his seat.
Yeah. Because what you said is perfectly right, and this makes me rethink my assessment. Because the thing is, the US have a huge, reliable, and powerful ecosystem for AI. If they want something done, if they have a strategic vision, they find a player that can do it, even 2 or 3 or 4 competitive players that can do it. I would just want to lay the basic groundwork to have an ecosystem in a few years' time to address these strategic questions. And formulating strategic answers, not questions, now would mean that you spend less thought on how to establish an ecosystem that can even address these questions. So I'm still step A, and they can answer step C.
My colleague in France sent me a text message earlier. It actually was a Teams message with a picture of President Macron announcing
You
the
advertised
investment.
Copilot twice now, or maybe thrice, and Teams now.
Yeah, and what we need to say, and I need to say here, is on the 15th of February, so earlier, Chancellor Scholz was on this stage making an announcement for an investment that was larger than was done today in France. So I think I want to make a point of that. And the real point is that data center investment is one key prerequisite of being able to successfully develop AI in country, in region. So that's a great example of we see investments across Europe. We are creating the infrastructure for being able to develop models, to deploy them across the entire society and economy. And that's going to be, I'm sure, a big contribution to European growth and innovation.
So in some, from what I've heard, we need more investments, but preferably not in private structures, but in, you called it digital public infrastructure, but to make sure that we actually get to that competitive stage. Roughly? There were more questions, so if you want to correct me, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll go more questions.
Hi, thank you for this panel. After 8 hours of AI, I mean, this was the cherry on top. So, okay, from this morning, like most of us here, we've been discussing all aspects, and we all conclude to one basic thing. Okay, AI is not in a vacuum. It's been coming, and the discussion is for years. 30 years ago, the same was with the web. Somebody said it's stupid and it's the devil, and then, you know, we cannot live without the internet. 25 years ago, somebody put a phone in our hands, and then somebody made it smart. When they made it smart, they told us that we're becoming stupid because we're using it all the time. Okay, so technology and the evolution of technology, it's going to happen, and it's inevitable. And the more we advance, what we see as users and as professionals in the field is that fear-mongering comes in bigger chunks now. Because the esteemed colleague from Microsoft is saying, like, everybody should use it, and then the whole discussion is about, oh my God, AI is going to, you know, destroy the elections in a month and everything. So how can we ever hope that we can advance and everybody would use AI and build infrastructure and everybody in Europe would use it, and then the act is not going to leave us behind, and then we serve fear-mongering to everybody that, you know, we don't legislate fast enough, and then what if we don't ethically use it? We don't discuss about ethically using a kitchen knife. If you don't use it to cut your meat and you use it on a person, you go to jail. So why is it so hard for us to legislate fast to a certain point for people to be able to comfortably use technology?
But this is the AI Act. The AI Act says if you use the kitchen knife for cutting meat, it's perfectly fine. If you use the kitchen knife for cutting people, it's not that good.
Yeah, but do you know where the line is for AI? Is it legislated now? So if I use it to do something like really bad?
The AI, I think we all are a fan of.
Yeah, but we hope for it. This panel just says that, yeah, you know, legislation, the regulators should go faster. But then again, a lot of people are using it in ways that, and we want them to play around with it to see where it can lead. But what if it leads somewhere that it's not good?
Well, maybe one distinction that's important on that to take up on, and I'm like, jump in if you see that, but it's the responsibility in mitigating the risk is not on the individual, right? What we've been talking about and what the AI Rec does is figuring out what are the risk assessments that those that develop those models and train the models need to assess to make sure that it can't be abused, so that ChatGPT has ways to make sure that it doesn't spew out racist content and that you have certain fallbacks, right? So that's the question. How can we make sure that the accountability and the responsibility lies where these are created so that people can just use it, so that you don't have to ask those questions. Things will go wrong, but at a much smaller scale. I think that's one of the distinctions that maybe we haven't pointed out enough, that it's really about who carries your responsibility, and it's not you as an individual needing to worry about what's out there can't be used because it's unsafe.
It was the same with disinformation. Like 8 years ago, like we've seen what happened with Brexit and with US, and we said, oh my God, disinformation, we need to do something about it, and we still haven't done anything about it.
They do. I just mentioned that before, because Brexit would not have been. Brexit was a huge accident.
We still talked about even more enhanced with AI.
And that is true. Disinformation is a challenge we haven't
Yes.
tackled. Yes, you're right. I mean, I can speak about that for hours because that's what I work on. But it's true. We have more to do, and it's important that we have watermarking. It's not going to solve the problem, for sure. There's a societal undercurrent that we haven't solved, right? There's an incentive and there's a business model behind spreading disinformation that we can't challenge with the AI Act. Like that's something that we as societies have to figure out. So you're right in that sense that we can't challenge that. But I saw you also jumping in, so.
Yeah, I'm a bit worried. Just kick it off now because I could also talk about it for hours because it's what I'm working on since 2016. I mean, I think I mentioned that with regard to disinformation, it's complex. I mean, you have the landscape shifted, and I think that's one of the major learnings we also had with the AI Act, to look at where the risks are. And the risks with regard to disinformation shifted slightly. What we observe is that disinformation campaigns are not happening directly before elections anymore. That was the case 2016, 2017, and so on. Right now, it's rather happening around geopolitical events because we have two major geopolitical crises. But it's often taking place months, if not years, before federal elections. So we are following one big Russian campaign called Doppelganger. It's publicly known for more than 2 years, and they are super persistent. But they are not using AI. But they tackle the weaknesses of the information ecosystem. So what they are doing now, in 2016, they would have created many fake accounts on Facebook to try to spread disinformation. It's not what they do. They create websites, duplicate pages of Spiegel, even the Federal Ministry of the Interior, the BKA, and spread disinformation via these websites. Taking down a website in a decentralized infrastructure as the internet is a major challenge. We can't do anything about it. And there is no dedicated actor who could do something about it. So this is, I think, the next forthcoming task of governments and maybe even United Nations bodies to tackle, because it's really a major challenge. And that's something we observe, we are tracking for months now, or for the past 2 years. So what I'm trying to say is the ecosystem is changing. AI is one tool in this regard. Media publishers have a responsibility, as you just mentioned, to tackle this information. One of the major carriers over the past 2 years were classic media, by the way. Of course, not on purpose, but they were victims of very strategic, organized disinformation campaigns by foreign actors. So it's a very complex issue, and I would even say it's not media policy. That is classic security policy we are talking about here. Because it's really about defense of public discourse, it's about defense of our societies, and of course, nation states overall. And what makes me actually a bit positive about this issue, because I covered it in 2016 and 17 already, that we moved on. The collaboration between private sector is much, much better, very sophisticated, but also if I have a look at the federal government, when we approached the federal government in 2017, media policy stakeholders said, that's not our issue, disinformation, that's security politics. The security policy people said, that's media policy, go to them. Media authorities are responsible, and so on. Now it's highly coordinated, it's very well prepared, I would also say, from the government point of view, with the Federal Office for Information Security, Cybersecurity Agency, an early warning unit, which was just created at the Interior Ministry in Germany, and I see this across Europe, so this is not just Germany. So I think everybody is aware, and that's the first and most important thing, that all the actors are aware, private sector, society, and governments, and work closely together, and that's at least what I observe. Of course, it's risk mitigating. There is, of course, a risk left on the table, and the landscape is changing now with AI, but I must say I'm quite confident that we are still a bit ahead. I mean, we have very powerful enemies, and I'm explicitly saying like this. We have some nation states who are powerful, but also the European Union is quite powerful in developing counter mechanisms, and also the platforms who just agreed on the Munich Tech Accord. We have also quite some resources we are putting into this and investing in defending our platforms and the public and democratic discourse.
How do you feel now? Okay. Are there more questions? Oh, okay, you triggered more questions.
Thank you. So I'm Carlos Norman from FTI Consulting, and I wanted to bring back the geopolitical aspects into the debate. And now, considering that geopolitical rivalry has quite an impact on economic policy, on trade policy, and eventually regulation, I think AI regulation is ultimately an aspect of it, because the nation or the bloc that manages to regulate it in a way that it can thrive, that bloc eventually would have a strategic advantage, I believe. And Semjon, in your initial statement, you mentioned that ideally we would arrive at a common or joint framework for AI, at least on a transatlantic level, and ideally on a G7 level. Now, considering the elections that were also mentioned coming up, do you see the possibility that this transatlantic unity, as it is now, could eventually fracture as well, and then lead to a situation where the US and Europe would be more isolated from each other when it comes to development of AI, and maybe to do an entire panel? So is that a situation that maybe organizations that are researching and investing in AI should prepare for?
Well, yeah, I can give it a try. Did you?
I don't know whether I got the question. Can you rephrase the question part?
Of course. So, do you believe there's a possibility that Europe and the US arrive at a situation where they don't pull on one string when it comes to the regulation of AI?
Yeah, they should urgently so, because as I think we all agree implicitly on one thing, that there is a kind of an arms race between the autocratic regimes and the democratic regimes. And the thing is that all these things like watermarking, they only work in democratic regimes, because in autocratic regimes they don't even care, right? And they don't care about the export of news, and they don't care within their own regimes' media reach. So the thing is that we need to agree globally at first step, US and Europe, then the global democracies, and then whatever solution we find should be either impactful enough or agreeable enough so that our adversary actors and non-democratic regimes join the club. And this is where you can compare AI with nuclear energy or nuclear technology. The comparison is not working well for a lot of things, but when it comes to global enforcement and why it needs to be globally enforced, this is where these technologies are of the same cut.
Does that answer your question?
Partly, but I think it do the trick.
We might not get to a full
strong
answer.
Yes, and then how can we get there? That was the part that I said.
Maybe we'll collect the next questions with an eye to the time that we have.
Thanks for the panel. My name is Deniz. I'm from Vilnius University. So if I made two questions, I try to make them short. One is about the EU AI Act, and particularly the risk-based approach. And I am wondering, from the tech companies, from your perspective, how do you find differentiation of risks and the idea that there will be measured depending on potential harm to fundamental rights? Do you find it clear? Do you find it objectively possible to measure and make those assessments? Because I understand this is the main reason of the regulation, yeah? Will you get regulated more or less? So how do you find this, I would say, political installation of risks? And my second question is putting a little bit more geopolitics. Reading like national strategies on AI, if you take, for example, G7 countries, everybody's claiming leadership in AI. I think the UK is even calling itself like a super house of AI. Yeah? So how the big tech companies, which are actually powerhouses in this regard, how do you find this relation to state countries claiming leadership? What does it mean to win that leadership? And then partnership in projects like supporting AI developments in the battlefield. Thanks.
Let's take one more. Yep.
Yeah, hi, Felix here, working for an insurance company in Munich. My question would be mainly to the industry representatives, whether you've seen the Brussels effect already taking off a bit when you talk to your international colleagues, or also anybody on the panel, if you have any experience already, if we can say that AI Act, EU AI Act will have maybe a similar result than GDPR. Thanks.
3 questions to the industry primarily. I'm going to look at you first.
So on the risk framework, there are a lot of provisions in the AI Act that are not entirely 100% clear for everyone to implement as yet. So that's work that needs to be done, and I think we all have to go through this implementation process, and there is a staggered approach to dates when certain model level technologies come under scrutiny. The one thing that I would mention is on the systemic risk, which is the GPAI system, so the model level, where there is a very interesting way to determine when a GPAI model is systemic risk. So on the one hand side, it's the amount of compute measured in flops. 25 flops is the threshold for models to be considered systemic risk. But then there is also the possibility for the AI office and essentially the European Commission to make a certain system or certain systems to be systemic risk. And I think that is where it is important to keep an eye on that the way that certain technologies are classified to be systemic risk continue to be transparent for those, in particular in Europe, that are developing these models. If that is not the case, then it's going to create a level of uncertainty that is certainly not going to incentivize the development and the deployment of these systems.
Thank you. Deniz, do you want to come in on that too? How does it affect you, and do you see that triggering on into other markets?
Your first question, I was thinking about it because I think we as a company, we are also facing several requirements from all of our customers. And so one more framework doesn't kill us. I know that we're going to handle that too. So I think the AI Act and the risk assessment is not going to be a problem, and I'm very excited to see what kind of results we're going to achieve maybe in a couple of years, and maybe, I don't know how it's going to develop or how it's going to change everything also, but I think it's a progress, and I'm not scared of that. I'm looking forward actually, because I think, and maybe that's the former question I was also thinking about the whole time. The technologies, for example, we use are also provided from other countries. So I think we have to share our knowledge, and we have to see and reflect how it's going to be in our networking with, for example, America, because they also provide the technologies we use, for example. So it's I think it's quite interesting what's going to happen in the next years, and I'm not scared at all, and I'm very excited and looking forward for it. But I forgot your last question, I'm sorry.
Brussels effect, if you already see early indicators, whether it's coming to a similar maybe stage or size as what GDPR.
I don't see an effect now, but maybe you?
I think it's too early to say. I think structurally the AI Act is not comparable, of course, to the GDPR. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will not see the same impact as we had with GDPR. But there's a but, and that is theoretically, of course, the European Commission is playing a key role in regulating at least GPAI under the AI Act. But there's, of course, a role to play for national regulators, which still have to be appointed. And that, of course, again, bears a risk that enforcement will be fragmented. That's the same we have seen with many other regulations in Europe, as, for example, GDPR, that we have a regulation. It could be theoretically, not politically speaking, but theoretically speaking, solely enforced by the European Commission. It would be probably the best in terms of harmonized rules and enforcement. And I'm saying that doesn't matter. We are not having zero problems with the European Commission when it comes to enforcement. So it comes with a risk, of course, also for us, but it would be wishful, I would say, for a harmonized internal market in the European Union. So that I think is the risk, and depending on who's claiming the power in the member states, if it's, for example, the data protection authorities or any other authority, and then of course the overlaps might kick in. I talked about at the beginning the overlaps between GDPR, copyright regulation, AI Act, and many other laws, and the role different regulators play in this regard.
Thank you. We're at time. It's been quite the roller coaster, I would say. We definitely covered a lot of ground and topics, and you added some more with your questions. So thank you for that. Thank you for my four panelists and being willing to talk about things that you may not have been prepared for. So appreciate the openness, and thank you all for staying and having all the great questions. It's been a fun afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.